brown, making my way back into my hometown. Funny how this all looks different, but it feels the same. Like our lives never stop changing, some things never change. So fill your plate and fill your drink, and fill this house with family, the kind of love that all these years can't wash away. In the order that I get, I see that life is short and bittersweet. Thank God for this Thanksgiving Day. Watching football, watching families grow. The old kids' table all have kids of their own. Starting to see my grandfather in my nephew's eyes. Mom still can't talk about him and not almost cry. So fill your plate and fill your drink, and fill this house of family, the kind of love 1,000 miles can't wash away. 'Cause the older that I get, I see that life is short and bittersweet. Thank God for this Thanksgiving Day. So fill your plate and fill your drink, put your dishes in the kitchen sink, and let the leftover year just wash away. 'Cause we made it through, I do believe, the longest year in history. Thank God for this Thanksgiving Day.
Many of us take time this week to be intentionally thankful. And the image at the center of that all is the meal that we often share together. Susan and I always have family who travel in, and some are all of our kids and grandkids and some of our parents, and it's sort of a multi-generational circle of chaos that demands attention and is the glaring evidence of the goodness of God in our lives. We always, this year will be included in this, talk about my mom a lot, who loved this week. And she griped about it all the way until Thursday, and then she savored it, the company and the food. And then she would call after everyone left to reflect on it, and we miss her every year. But even in her absence, we're still thankful for her. So wherever you are and whatever your circumstance, I hope that you too can thank God for Thanksgiving Day, as the song said. And hey, you don't have to do it alone. So if you want to, you could join us on Thanksgiving Day at the Powhatan campus. We have this community meal, and many people from our church and lots of people outside of our church share in that meal together and enjoy some company with each other. Whatever you do, use this week especially to take inventory and to be thankful, because God has been good to you and to all of us. Hasmain Sudman was born in Iran, and he grew up in an intensely and nearly exclusively Muslim culture. And part of that culture, in his day at least, taught him to hate followers of Jesus. One day, he threw a stone to break this Christian woman's water pot, and it was a perfect strike. And the pot shattered into all kinds of pieces, and he laughed at her suffering, and he sort of smiled at her in condescension. And as he turned to run away, he tripped and fell, and he cut his knee, and it started to bleed. The woman began to move toward him. He assumed that she was going to hit him. Instead, she helped him. She cleaned and she dressed his wound, and she gave him something to eat. Her treatment of him, surprising as it was, left an impression that he carried with him all the way into his mandatory enlistment into the Iranian army. And at one point while he was serving there, he got sick, super sick, and was hospitalized. And an Armenian Christian came and prayed over him. He remembered that part, and when he awoke the next day, he was healed, having dreamed about Jesus in the night. So after his recovery, he sought out and he found an underground church, and he joined them in worship. Over time, he gave his life to Jesus, he renounced his Muslim faith, and he became a pastor. In a country that was and still is hostile towards Christians, being one is dangerous, as in life-threatening. Hasmin married, they had 4 children, and he committed his life to doing everything he could to bring more people of his own country to the truth about who Jesus is. He had this church that met in his home as he pastored it, and it grew rapidly, but the local authorities kept warning him. In Iran, converting away from Islam is a sin that carries the death penalty. But the greater sin for this guy was being the voice that helped other people convert. So they considered him a threat to Islam and a threat to Iran. And that's ultimately what put the noose around Hasmin's neck, literally. He was hung on December 3rd, 1990, almost 35 years ago to the day. His wife and his 4 children were never able to say goodbye. The execution happened just 2 weeks after they arrested him. And his kids, all of whom were followers of Jesus, weren't allowed to bury him. They weren't allowed to even mark his grave. Later, his daughter, Rasheen, who was 13 when her dad was killed, she was able to escape the country, and she said this: "Of course, my father refused to give up his faith. He could not renounce his God. His belief in Christ was his life. It was his deepest conviction." But here's the thing. Hasmin could have left Iran. His friends urged him to leave. There were several chances for him to escape, get out of the country with his family. He could have left and not given up his faith or renounced his God. And this is crucially important for all of us who are pursuers of God, trying to be followers of Jesus, because Hasmin Sudman knew that his calling was not just a life of faith, but a life of faithfulness. And those can be 2 different things. So we've been talking about how do we live with an unshakable faith. That's what this series is about. In a world that feels like it's increasingly hostile towards followers of Jesus, where much of our moral grounding has been turned on its head, where people seem determined to fight each other all the time, this series is about how do we know what to do and what God wants from us, and how to hold to our core convictions without being sucked into all the madness all the time. And I believe that one of the pivotal points of this, one of the answers to it, is that we are called to be faithful, not just people of faith. That's ultimately what Hasmin Sudman displayed. You and I don't live in a country, as you know, that at the moment anyway, imprisons or executes people for their religious convictions. But that doesn't mean that we don't or will never pay a price. In fact, if you were here last week when we launched this series, my last point was that followers of Jesus have to be prepared to pay a price for following Jesus. Today, I thought we would look at one account from the Bible and see how this will apply to our own lives today. Sort of the rubber meets the road, if you will. And we're going to talk about a guy named Daniel, and we read about him in the Bible, in the book that bears his name. It goes like this. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them daily food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah, that's Israel, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Okay, there's a lot here, and it's a bit of history, but it's incredibly relevant to this moment in our history. So if you'll just hang on with me for just a couple of minutes, we're going to go through some stuff. This is a map of modern day Israel. And by the way, I'm excited. It's been on my list for years to go there. And I'm going to Susan and I are going to lead a team, a group of people from our church to Israel next year in September. I'd love for you to go with us. If you're interested, shoot me an email and let us know. We'll send you the details. But this is Israel, and this is the land that God promised to Abraham's descendants. Joshua, Moses' protege, led the people of God into that land right there around 1407 BC, roughly 3,500 years ago, using some real rough rounding. And they went into that land, they conquered that land, and the nation of Israel was born. And it grew and it expanded, and really it became the superpower of their day. This is the empire of King David, the man after God's own heart. But what started out as sanctioned by God, ordained, anointed by God, holy and noble, it devolved into selfish ambition and sin and power hunger and abuse. And God tried. God tried to get the attention of the leaders and the people. He wanted to restore them. He wanted them to seek Him and to trust Him and to follow Him and obey Him. But finally, God just had enough. So about 1,000 years after they moved in, the nation of Israel fell to some powerful nations. One of them were the Babylonians. And the Babylonians move in and they destroyed the temple, which is in Jerusalem, the little dot right in the middle, the Temple of Solomon. The Babylonians destroy it in 586 BC. That's a date we know for sure. And from that day, from 586 BC until 1948, Israel was scattered without a home, and notably, they've been at war with their Arab and mostly Muslim neighbors. They've been fighting over that piece of land for 2,500 years. And when we first meet Daniel, Israel has been conquered by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians are led by a guy named King Nebuchadnezzar. And he's the one that orders the destruction of the sacred temple in Jerusalem. And he goes in before they tear it all down, and he takes out these religious artifacts, these important symbols for the Jewish people. They were considered sacred and holy, and he takes them out of their temple, and he puts them into the treasury of his pagan god, which is considered an abomination. And then the king orders that a few prestigious, well-educated, smart, good-looking men be taught about Babylonian culture and language and history. They were to be treated really well, and after a period of training, they would be brought into the king's service as advisors and other kinds of officials. So all that is important background because Daniel is one of these guys. Daniel is considered meets all the qualifications, but he's also determined to walk this fine line. Because on the one hand, he decides that he's going to obey and submit to King Nebuchadnezzar. But on the other hand, he figures out a way to do it in a way that still models his dedication to God. He prays, he serves God, and he restrains from things like wine and eating unclean foods according to Jewish law. And because of this, to Daniel, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. And it turns out Nebuchadnezzar, the king, has some visions and some dreams that are very troubling and disturbing to him. And so Daniel's gift comes in really handy along the way. But the conquering continued. The Babylonians weren't the last ones in, and eventually the Babylonians themselves get conquered by the Persians. And part of the spoils of victory for the Persians is that now the Persian Empire controls the land of Israel. So what I just read to you a minute ago was Daniel chapter 1. By the time we get to Daniel chapter 6, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian, is dead, and Darius, the king of Persia, is in power. And the rubber's about to meet the road for us. I know this is a lot of history, so just hang in there with me. We don't know much about Darius, the king of Persia. In fact, the only time we read about him anywhere, in any history book, anywhere, is in the book of Daniel in the Bible. Other historical documents are silent about this guy. But what we do know is that Daniel, who's about 80 when the Persians take over, is one of 3 vice president-like officials now in Persia. And unlike our country, where the VP really doesn't have any real power, Darius, the emperor, decides to hand over the day-to-day operation of the entire empire to these 3 guys. They wear this boring title like administrator, but they are actually very, very powerful. They're in fact running the whole kingdom. Well, Daniel, the Israelite, he's a really gifted leader. He's exceptionally blessed by God with wisdom. And Darius, the emperor, looks at him and decides, I'm going to appoint Daniel, I'm going to appoint him as like the senior VP. And I'm going to give him authority over even the other 2 guys, which is really good for the kingdom. And it's good for Darius and it's good for Daniel. But if you're one of those other 2 guys, you're not so happy about this. So they plot to have Daniel fired. They watch him carefully. They wait for him to stumble in any way, have just a little hiccup or make a mistake or a blunder or anything at all that would justify his removal. But all they get for their effort is frustration. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling the government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they can't find any reason to get rid of Daniel. And so what they do is they come up with another idea. They decide to use Daniel's faith in God and faithfulness to God against him. If they couldn't find fault in Daniel's behavior, they would go after the core of Daniel's identity. Like Hasmain Sudman's daughter said of him, he would never renounce his faith. She said it was core to his very identity, to his very existence. That was also true for Daniel. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, and advisors and governors have all agreed, that'll become important in a minute, have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except for you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue this decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. I want you to notice what they said, what they did in verse 7. They lied. Look at it more closely. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict. When they said this, the king would have assumed that all included Daniel, since Daniel was one of those administrators. And they said that all of us, everyone, is in agreement with this recommendation. It's curious to me that Darius makes this life and death decision that apparently can't be repealed or altered even by him, and he does it with relative ease, like very little thought. This is a tendency that some leaders have. And the premise is, the school of thought is that, well, good leaders make quick decisions. But the longer that I lead, the more that I'm learning to slow down when making decisions. In fact, I'm learning that the more consequential the decision, the more time it usually deserves. Of course, there are decisions that you don't have any choice about. You get backed in a corner, you have to make them quickly. But 20 years ago, I thought that every decision had to be made like that. And in the process, I made unnecessary mistakes and needless messes. Today, I'm learning to take time to gather more information and make decisions that balance intuition and information together. That's wiser leadership for sure. Darius is making a decision that is literally life and death, and he just doesn't reflect on it long enough. He just doesn't think about it. He doesn't think it through. In fact, not one time does he look around the room and say, "Hey, by the way, where's Daniel?" I mean, even though they told him we're all in agreement, he still should have thought about this better. He should have taken a day, slept on it, asked some more questions. If he had done that, he would have remembered that Daniel was a faithful servant of the God of Israel. Darius knew this. He would have known that Daniel, who Darius considered his most gifted leader of leaders, would never have betrayed the God that he served. If he had taken a little more time, he would have known that the decree he was considering would be a death sentence to the man that the king trusted and cared about and needed. You ever made a decision that was not thoroughly considered? Process that for just a second, because if you've lived any time at all, we've all done this. I was thinking about this actually, trying to figure out which one of my massive epic blunders would I use as an illustration for this point. I've got a notebook full of them. I thought about this one though. Some of you might know this, many of you don't. Today, Christmas Eve around here is really epic. If you haven't been a part of it and you come this year, you'll find out why. You'll find out why literally thousands of people show up around here for Christmas Eve. This was intentional. When we started our church, we said, let's be known as the church that has a really amazing Christmas Eve experience and tell people about Jesus along the way. And it really has grown. And yet early in the life of our church, we were still trying to put our feet on the ground. Lots of people were coming. At that point, hundreds of people were still coming on Christmas Eve. And we're like 3 or 4 or 5 years into it. And we had this thought. And this thought was, not everybody is experiencing joy at Christmas. Like we're just fabricating all this happiness, but there are people in the room who are sad, they're upset, they're hurting, they've experienced loss and grief. We've got to see them. They need to be seen and acknowledged. And so we came up with this idea. I'm just going to tell you in advance, when I sit around with pastors, one of my favorite things to do is to say to them, let's talk about our greatest ministry blunders. And let's share them together. And they're always like, what? I'm like, yeah, no, I want to hear your worst mistake ever. When I tell them what I'm about to tell you, they look at me like, could you possibly be that dumb? This cannot be a true story. But this is what we did. This is what we really did on Christmas Eve, probably 20 years ago now. We decided to acknowledge that Christmas was not happy for everyone. So at our big Christmas Eve experience, we did these little vignettes where we acknowledge that people are struggling. The first one was this girl walked out on the platform and she did this monologue. She was wearing this kind of long sleeve, loose fitting shirt, and she talked about how she had been cutting herself as a coping mechanism and hiding it with long sleeve from her parents. It was super sad. And then we did a Christmas song, and it was super amazing. And then somebody else walked out, a guy walked out, and he talked about how his wife had left him and he was thinking about ending his life. And then we did a Christmas song and it was amazing. And then someone else walked out and talked about how he was coping by drinking a lot because he no longer had a job and wasn't sure how to pay his bills. And then we did a Christmas song and it was amazing. And this went on through several vignettes and monologues. And I walked out, I stood in the atrium as people were leaving that day and people were sobbing and not in a good way. Like, I'm not kidding. People were so upset. People left the church and never came back. It was a complete and total disaster. What we learned, by the way, I hadn't thought it through. If I had thought it through, I would have realized you just can't mess with Christmas Eve. That's what we learned. We also learned, just as a side note, that people do need to acknowledge their pain at Christmas. And out of that experience, our Blue Christmas experience was born. It's one of the most powerful things we do around here. There are now churches all over everywhere who are doing a Blue Christmas experience similar to ours. If we'd thought it through better, if we had asked a few more questions, if I had slept on it and reflected on it a little more, we would have known that it had its place, just not on that particular day. King Darius didn't think through the possibilities. He tends to turn off his brain when his advisors come into the room. They said it, so it must be so. But even honest, well-intentioned, smart, gifted people can be wrong. And listen, when the decision is yours to make, getting advice is good. I recommend it as a part of the process of making important decisions, but the decision, if it's yours, is always still yours. Well, the king makes the decision. Daniel doesn't know about it, but he does find out. So when Daniel learned that this decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Note what Daniel did. He hears about the king's decree, which explicitly prohibits him praying in any direction other than the king to anyone other than the king. And Daniel doesn't file a petition. He doesn't run to the king and beg, and he doesn't push pause on his own faithfulness to God. Instead, he goes home and he did what he always did. He got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to God, check this out, just as he had done before. And that's especially curious because here's the thing about prayer. You can do it anytime, anywhere, right? I mean, have you ever been in the presence of someone or maybe in a meeting and you prayed and they didn't even know you were praying? I have. I've prayed this prayer. Many times I've been in a meeting and I prayed this prayer, oh God, help me behave right now. Am I the only one that's ever happened to? Or how about when somebody's upset with me or they're upset with the church and I'm sitting with them, I will often silently pray, God, help me listen well. Help me understand where this person is coming from. Help me feel what they feel. Every week, before I walk out on this platform, I pray and ask that God's voice would be elevated and mine would be diminished. Because I say to him, God, yours is the only voice that matters. The point is, Daniel could have prayed while sitting in his chair with his eyes open. You do know that there's no magic that happens when you close your eyes when you pray, right? This is not the Matrix. I usually close my eyes when I pray just to remove all the distractions. That's it. And I say usually I close my eyes because if I pray while I'm driving. So why did Daniel pray on his knees with the window open facing Jerusalem just as he had done before? Because Daniel knew this was not just about his faith. It was about his faithfulness. His witness was in his public display of his faith, not just in his private devotion of it. He knew that God had called him to be visibly faithful and not hide what he believed or the one he ultimately served. This is really important for you and me. The follower of Jesus is called to an unshakable faith that is not just one of private devotion, but of public faithfulness. It's why the Apostle Paul would say, for this reason, I also suffer these things. Nevertheless, I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that he is able to keep what I have committed to him until that day. I am not ashamed, Paul said, because I know whom I believe, and I'm convinced that he's trustworthy to see me through no matter what, and that ultimately, whatever happens, Jesus wins, and I'll spend eternity with him. My job as a follower of Jesus, and if you wear that label, your job as a follower of Jesus is not just to be a person of faith, but to live with faithfulness. And that will make me, like Daniel and like any follower of Jesus, ultimately a target. Predictably, Daniel's enemies, they see him praying. He wasn't trying to hide it. And he knew they would see him, and they tell the king. So then they said to the king, Daniel, who's one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. We don't know what it means that the king made every effort to save Daniel. The way the text reads, within the part that we've already looked at, that for some reason when Darius issued this decree, he did it in such a way that it couldn't be repealed or taken back, not even by him. So if the law can't be changed, and the consequence of breaking the law can't be changed, then the only thing the king could have done to save Daniel would be to beg him to pause his devotion to God for 30 days. Or maybe the king begged Daniel to leave the country, much like Hasmain Sudman's family did with him. That would have saved his life, but it would have been equally unfaithful for Daniel. Daniel was not just called to a life of faith, but to a life of faithfulness. And that meant doing what God wanted, where God wanted, when God wanted. And Daniel believed that God wanted him in the proximity of King Darius. So things get precarious for him. The men went as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and they threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Did you catch that? Do you see it? This line right here, "May your God, whom you serve continuously, rescue you." Think about this for a second. That is about as close to a prayer as you can get without actually praying. I mean, how much distance is there from that statement to saying, which that statement is made to God, to Daniel, from that to God, please save Daniel? There's not a lot of space between the two. It's almost the same thing. But I guess the king doesn't want to throw himself into the lion's den, so he does just a bit of verbal gymnastics, but he is clearly inching towards his own faith because of Daniel's faithfulness. They throw Daniel in, and he's surrounded by this pride of lions that hasn't eaten in days, and so they're super hungry. And Daniel is well fed and fit, so he's just the meal these cats are looking for. And they roll a stone in front of the den, and the king seals it with his signet ring. And we're going to pick it up from there, and I'm going to read the rest. It's longer than we would normally cover here, but it tells the rest of the story, and it'll be worth it. So here we go. Then the king returned to his palace, spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't sleep. He was a wreck over this. At first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually," that's the second time he said that, "been able to rescue you from the lions?" I find this curious. There is no way Daniel survives the night. Not a chance. I mean, he should have been eaten before the king made it back to the palace. So why does the king run to the den in the morning and call out Daniel's name? He actually answers this question in his own words. "Daniel, servant of the living God." Did you hear it? Darius is developing his own faith because of Daniel's faithfulness, which is what God intended all along. And so Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed, gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in, thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Okay, Darius probably has a little work to do on his faith here. Let's just acknowledge that. Can we set that aside for a second? Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth. And he writes this letter and he says, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves and he performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. And he rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." This story is about two things, and both are the secret to unshakable faith, especially in moments of persecution and trial. It is about our calling to faithfulness to God and about God's absolute faithfulness to us. Daniel understood, knew, believed to his core how powerful, how good, how loving, how faithful God was. And his entire life mission was to be exactly who God wanted him to be, faithful in return. Daniel knew that faithfulness was reflecting God's love and power and goodness towards others, his posture towards those in authority, and his devotion to the one worthy of his trust. I don't know about you, but I want to be like that. And I'll just confess to you, I'm not all the way there yet. But I believe that faithfulness is the ultimate display that God wants of my faith. So a few years ago, the Passion Community team wrote a song about this very thing. If you don't know it, it's kind of easy to catch on, so I'm going to ask you to stand with me. We thought it would be the perfect way to finish our time together today.
I fall short, but you don't fall at all. I look down, but you tell me to stand tall. In every situation, you hold me up in love. And with every hesitation, you tell me I'm enough, I'm enough. Your holiness is making me holy. Your goodness makes me want to be so good. Your faithfulness is making me faithful as I seek to live like you would. My love is shallow, but yours is deeper than the sea. The path is narrow, but you made a way for me. In every situation, you hold me up in love. And with every hesitation, you tell me I'm enough, I'm enough. Your holiness is making me holy. Your goodness makes me want to be so good. Your faithfulness is making me faithful as I seek to live like you would. As I seek to live like you would. Help me to love like you. Help me to serve like you do. Show me how to live. Show me how to give. Show me how to be like you. Your holiness is making me holy. Your goodness makes me want to be so good. Your faithfulness is making me faithful as I seek to live like you would. Your holiness is making me holy. Your goodness makes me want to be so good. Your faithfulness is making me faithful as I seek to live like you would. As I seek to live like you would.
This Thanksgiving week in particular is going to be an amazing opportunity for you and I to show our unshakable faith around the people we love most. We all know there's the possibility of tensions rising around the dinner table, but they don't have to, at least not within us. So let's commit together to be examples to those we love on how we can act, even when the world seems to be going crazy. Our God is still on the throne, and he still wins. I hope that you and yours have an amazing Thanksgiving day. We look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, invite a friend. We'll see you both then.